I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming together this evening for an important and timely discussion on racial bias and hate crimes. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Office of Justice Programs, Bureau of Justice Assistance, Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Education, Investigation, and Prosecution Program, which has allowed us to engage with communities in fostering a safer, more inclusive environment for all. In addition to our focus on community engagement, I am proud to share that we have also established a specialized and dedicated hate crimes unit within the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office. And this unit is led by Assistant District Attorneys Geraldine Lambert and Michael Heyer, who are committed to the vertical prosecution of these hate crime cases. This specialized unit is another step in our ongoing effort to combat hate crimes, protect victims, and hold perpetrators accountable. This panel discussion, building awareness and understanding, addressing racial bias and hate crimes in our communities, is being held in recognition of Hate Crimes Awareness Month. Today, our goal is threefold. First, to foster greater awareness of the impact of hate crimes in our communities. Second, to encourage open and honest dialogue about these challenges. And third, to offer valuable insights on preventing hate crimes and supporting victims. This discussion is part of our ongoing efforts to create spaces where we can learn, share, and work together to address the root causes of racial bias and hate, while ensuring that those impacted by these crimes receive the support they need. I also would like to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible partners who have helped bring this event to life. The Dillard University Center for Racial Justice, the St. Charles Avenue Center for Faith and Action, the Mayor's Office of Human Rights and Equity, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Federal Bureau of Investigation Civil Rights Division, and Southern University at New Orleans. Your partnership and commitment to this cause are vital to the work we are doing. Together, let us use today as an opportunity to listen, learn, and act so that we can make meaningful progress towards eradicating hate crimes and ensuring justice for all. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to the rich discussion ahead with our esteemed panelists. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to begin by introducing our panelists. Panelist number one, we have Mr. Keith Lampkin, who's the Chief of Operations and External Affairs with the Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office. Panelist number two, we have Caroline Durham from the St. Charles Center for Faith and Action. She's the Executive Director of that organization. Sitting next to her, we have Dr. Ashraf Ishmael, Director of Center for Racial Justice, Dillard University. Sitting next to Dr. Ishmael, we have Special Agent in Charge, Hannah Buck, with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, and we also have Mr. Kel Epperson, who also works for the FBI as well. Thank you for coming and participating. I'm going to start with an open question. I'll begin with Keith. I'll begin with everyone. What is your organization's or agency's primary role in serving and engaging marginalized communities? Mr. Lampkin?
Thank you, Jessica. How's that? That feels too loud. All right. Thanks to all of you guys for being here too. I think for our office, right, we're the DA's office who are the chief prosecutors for state level crimes in New Orleans. A big driver of our initiatives as a whole is DA Jason Williams, who ran on a platform, really to make sure that everybody in the community, regardless of how abused they have been by systems in the past, regardless of if they had a mistake in their past, everybody saw the office as their DA's office. Historically, we think that marginalized communities, whether that be racial, whether that be sexual orientation, whatever classification about you may cause other people to look at you as other or not majority, have made up the majority of the populations that are in our jail and prosecuted, have been persecuted. And, so a big effort of ours is really engaging community in every way that we possibly can. That's to educate about the role of our office, educate about what we do, make sure everybody does see our office as their DA's office. So when something happens to you, you feel comfortable speaking up. And when you see something that you feel comfortable saying something about that, and that it's not a boogeyman that is for someone else or is that's looking to abuse you. So we have very much not only engaged people who are victims of crime, who might find themselves in our office because they've been victimized by someone else, but engaging people so that we can really understand what the contributing factors are to that have really made the environment conducive to that abuse, to murder, to robbery, to those violent crimes that unfortunately happen too regularly in our society. So we've done that through messaging and education. We've done that through transparency and data and outcomes about what our office does in court, what we do outside of court. And we also launched an initiative called the Data Informed Community Engagement very recently that allows us, along with Jessica, who is our hate crimes community liaison, to go out in community and figure out where violent crime meets quality of life violations, right? Like, is your neighborhood dimly lit and, your streets messed up, and is that contributing to what crimes happen? There are a bunch of blighted properties that are right next to yours that are hubs for, drugs and other criminal activity. So we've really been trying to be on the street as much as possible to educate people about what we do, to have people actually have a role and some say in what public safety looks like in their specific neighborhoods. And a lot of that, really gives us an opportunity to talk to people who just traditionally would not feel comfortable engaging with, an ADA or a police officer who's walking the street in that way, because we're there to listen and not only to come to you to ask you for information, and not only there to try to get you in a gotcha moment that lands you in jail. So it was a mouthful, but we are engaging in a lot of ways. A lot of it is around education and giving people some autonomy in what's happening in the public safety system.
Thank you, Mr. Lansing. Same question, Mr.
Evening. The St. Charles Center for Faith Plus Action works at the intersection of faith and social justice action. All sacred texts, no matter the spiritual practice, speaks that we are creations of God. The work that we're doing in terms of social justice action is focused in part on reforming the criminal legal system, and is also dealing with racial justice and racial healing within faith communities. And so our work is to engage. We talk about the wellspring of people, their community members that are not aware of, not educated about what are the underlying causes that create and feed the criminal legal system, and are not aware of the harms that the criminal legal system itself creates. And yet there is wonderful work, change work, reform work, that is investing in people, that is allowing communities to thrive, that is healing communities. And a lot of that is around restorative justice. So a lot of our work is focused on understanding the alternatives to the work of the district attorney, to the work of the FBI, that if we engage in restorative justice as a culture, if we see one another from the space of divine beings, God created, then we will in fact not have hate crimes. We will in fact treat one another from a perspective of that. And in the meantime, how do we resource ourselves so that we are able to bring healing as a whole community of people of faith and people of conscience? So that's a bit of how we do what we do.
We started the Dillard University Center for Racial Justice in 2020, and the startup was focused around the George Floyd murders and police brutality. But very early on, we recognized that the center could really do some important work in terms of the entire city of New Orleans and addressing marginalized communities. And our focus has been on public safety, education, juvenile justice delinquency, and community advocacy and social work. We're a small staff, but I think we do a lot of important work on a day-to-day basis. This is also Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we've been heavily involved in the area and work in that area. I'm on the board at the University Medical Center as we work to address these areas, and certainly we have a conference this coming week. We have focused a lot over this last 2 years to go into our school systems and working with our young people and having our young people on campus to discuss these issues of race, class, religion, racial and social justice. We've worked with the Southern Poverty Center. Again, we've worked with our various law enforcement agencies. We just recently received a grant focused on terrorism and prevention. I finished a book about 2 years ago called Terrorism in the U.S., which I shared with Jessica when we got the funding for this Hate Crimes Act, and because all this is really correlated. We often kind of focus in on terrorism around the world, and I'm Muslim by faith and Arab American, but a lot of the terrorism goes right into our homes. But we never use the word terrorism. A lot of this stuff that goes on really is very frustrating, and our communities seem to be very divided. And as a Center for Racial Justice, we have worked very hard. Again, we're a staff of 2.5. We're trying to work with our young people at Dillard and getting them very involved in the different activities that we do, but also working with our communities and every aspect that people allow us to get involved with in terms of safety, education, the youth, and again, community advocacy. And certainly also we have this coming Thursday, Police Brutality Day, which is another area we have focused in on and addressing. This coming Monday, the Ronald Green murder trial is happening. So we're traveling to Farmersville, leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning to make sure we're there right at 9 to support what's going on, because these are issues that seem to be ongoing. And we're trying to get our trying to get our point across. And as you know, one person can make a difference, but again, if I bring in 100 students, they can really make a difference. They're going to a courtroom. So sometimes I feel a little confined as a university in terms of what we're doing. I feel the power of what we're doing, and I appreciate the community that's getting involved, like Jessica and a lot of parts of the community that really get us involved in the work that in terms of striving to work in reducing racial and social justice. We just did a Warren clinic where we helped over 300 people. We did an expungement day where we donated $10,000 to expunge, over 25 people, and that's something again we're proud of in terms of the work that we're doing. Just yesterday, we took 12 St. Aug students to register to vote, at City Hall. It seemed like a little thing, was a big thing to us. They spent the day with us, so we're trying. We're doing what we can. We work hard 7 days a week to make a difference out there, and again, I appreciate the Dillard community and also the New Orleans community for working with us, and vice versa, and then helping us too, because this is certainly all of us on this panel. It's just endless work that just it'll all be here after we're gone. But we need to continue to work to strive to address these issues of racial and social injustice.
Can you guys hear me okay, or do I need the microphone? Okay, great. So from the FBI's perspective as it relates to civil rights and hate crimes, one of our primary functions is to investigate civil rights violations, right, that may rise to a federal level. We spend a lot of time doing outreach. We do outreach with community groups. If anybody is a local church or a local organization that you want us to come and teach about civil rights matters, we are happy to do that. Our job is to get out and advocate for the public, right, for people who are potentially been impacted by any type of civil rights violation, right? So we're the investigators. We're the investigative wing for the Department of Justice as it relates to civil rights matters, right? We do a boatload of outreach. We do a lot of trainings for law enforcement organizations, right? So you'll hear a little bit tonight about something called the color of law violation, right? So it's our job to go out and educate LSP, right? So that we don't see anything more like Ronald Green happen ever again, right? To educate the local sheriff's departments. We go and we speak to every graduating class of the NOPD. We're doing that now with LSP as well. So the training part is a large component for us. And then we are here to be your advocate, right? One of the things that we're trying to really impress upon folks is if you've heard about something that may have happened that wasn't right? Or if you heard about like an improper use of force from PD, we want to know that, right? We want to connect with our federal prosecutors so that we can determine, is there a way to get to any type of federal charge for that, right? So, I don't know, Kill is probably our office's most experienced and accomplished civil rights investigators, who maybe have some other thoughts on that.
No, we covered it broadly. We also investigate things that. Yeah, I'm sorry. I wasn't projecting my voice like Hannah. Maybe I should use the microphone, sorry.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We also investigate FACE Act violations, which is the freedom of access to clinic entrances, which typically does with women's reproductive health clinics and locations, along with, as FACE Act Club said, with the color of law and then the hate crimes investigations.
Thank you so much for that commentary. So right now, I really want to start the conversation off and talk about some law enforcement and legal processes. So one of the first things I would like to discuss, and I want to have this first question for Keith. How can you explain to the audience, how does our office determine whether a crime qualifies as a hate crime?
Yeah, so,
Okay, so I think that the simple answer to that is, just like with every crime that may be committed, is that we follow the elements of the crime, right, to determine whether or not there's a hate crime. One of the things that we learned in our sort of entry into this space on prosecuting hate crimes is relatively new. As we are doing these educational events and going around talking about this, there's a huge education that we're undergoing as well. We applied for and engaged the federal government for this grant because, we realized that we didn't have a bunch of data on the state level that showed that there were a bunch of people who were reporting hate crimes to our office, right? And as we listen to our colleagues from the FBI, they've got this great infrastructure where they're doing education to the community and letting people know, hey, there's a hotline you can call. You can let us know when you think you've been a victim of a hate crime. For our purposes, we are just really critically beginning to look at, one, we haven't had a bunch, but what do we do whenever we get something that looks like it in our doors? And, a part of that also is the fact that, the cases that we prosecute are referred to our office from the NPD or from the state police, from law enforcement agencies. So, you need there to be an identification of something that looks like a hate crime from a law enforcement perspective. Then it comes into our doors where we begin to do what's called screening that case. That's what ED Michael Heyer does. That's what our full screening division does to review a case. And there's been an allegation that someone has been victimized based upon race, religion, color, any of those suspect classes that someone may be attacked for or victimized for, to determine if we can move forward with charges that have a high likelihood of leading to a guilty verdict. So in addition to things that might be referred to us as a hate crime because law enforcement saw it as such, we also have a job of receiving something that may be a little more innocuous. It may come through and it may just look like a fight, or it may look like a battery or something else. And there could be something about the narrative as written up that leads us to take a longer look at the facts of this case and at the people involved. Is there something about our victim? Is there something about the things the alleged perpetrator says or does or in their history that suggested that they may have attacked the individual who's been victimized because of a characteristic, an immutable characteristic that they can't control? So it's really a thoughtful process that involves a little bit of legal research, but also some common sense and a keen eye to what this narrative says. what about this report? What do we learn about the parties involved that might suggest to us that somebody may have been targeted based upon race, religion, or some of those other factors about them?
Thank you so much. Mr. Epperson, would you mind answering that question from an FBI perspective? How does the office determine whether or not a crime is a hate crime, and how does that look hate crime versus like maybe a racial bias?
Certainly, I'm going to kind of say a lot of what Keith said as well. It's going to be fact dependent. We're going to take the circumstances of the fact as the allegation comes in, whether that's the victim that's reporting it to us, a family member, could be a witness, a neighbor. They're going to provide the information. That's typically how we ingest it, is through, oftentimes it's a walk into our office. Someone's going to call the 1-800-CALL FBI number, or they're going to send, an electronic tip through an email. So once we get that, we have to immediately look at it, and just based on the facts of what we have, if it's a previous assault, we would love to get police reports, because that kind of sets it in stone about what we know happened, at least basically, and then try to determine, based on that set of facts, if it fits in with the legal analysis. We work with both attorneys at the United States Attorney's Office. We're dedicated to civil rights investigations, as well as we also coordinate with Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division up there. We have multiple trial attorneys that are nothing but just pure experts in this field, and we're able to talk to them and say, hey, here's the facts as we have them. It looks like it to us. What do you think? And then we can develop a investigative strategy from there. And that what's unique about a hate crime is that it's always going to be typically after the fact. It's not going to be like when we investigate, let's say, a drug organization. It's going to be ongoing, and you're going to try to capture real-time information and real-time intelligence and evidence. Whereas a hate crime is something that is a snapshot in time, typically. So then we can go back and say who was there, who saw what other information is there. And then we have as the FBI, we also have the ability to start in a predicated investigation. We have the ability to serve search warrants on emails in the iCloud and people's online presence to determine, hey, does this go deeper than just this one incident? Is it a history, kind of like you were talking about, sir? And are they affiliated with any known hate groups? Right? We have that ability to obtain further evidence to support whether there was a bias involved, what led up to the crime.
One thing that I should have mentioned earlier is we are able to serve as a resource also for the DA's office if you're investigating a potential hate crime. If there's, for example, some type of social media or a video that needs to be enhanced, we have excellent resources that we can send back to Quantico or to other facilities to blow up video, capture license plates and things like that. The kind of stuff that you see on TV, we can actually do a lot of that, and we do that in a lot of our civil rights cases, is provide assistance to state and locals.
And just, if I could that's a really good point too. Just the existence of social media and being in 2024, it is amazing. You think that when somebody's going to commit a crime or they're going to do something awful, that they won't document it for the whole world to see. People love to telegraph the things that they're going to do on social media or take credit for it, or it may just be someone who has a penchant for posting the hateful thoughts that they have, and being very open about sharing their hatred for a particular group. And there's so much of that information that's available in the public sphere that you don't have to, they've got wonderful tools at the FBI and some of our investigative agencies to go and pull a lot of things, and much of that you don't need to, dig deep, and you don't need to go and have some sort of top secret clearance to see it. You can usually go and do a quick Google search or go to their Facebook, and you can find so many of those things. So it's just such an amazing investigative tool for not just hate crimes, honestly, but crimes generally, to really get to someone's thought process prior to them committing a criminal act.
And speaking of those tools, can we talk a little bit about, and I would like to hear from either Ms. Buck or either Mr. Everson,
Well, I mean, we have the Uniform Crime Report, and the information is only as good as the information coming in. And that's one of our challenges, is to get more reporting from smaller agencies, and in some cases, some of the larger agencies, to provide that information. And that's going to, create, in essence, get an idea, a heat map of sorts, to say where are our incidences, where do we need to surge resources. But that information, it's a yearly Uniform Crime Report, and there's a special carve out for the hate crimes. It's open source. You can look it up just on the open internet. It's not top secret or anything. No clearance needed. And it's fascinating. Again, it's only as good as what's reported, but of what is reported, it can get really granular and really specific about who is targeted, who is perpetrating, and what that looks like. But that's going to be a higher level for an investigator. We're not necessarily looking at large data sets because we're looking at one snapshot at a time, one instance, a crime that happened on a particular date and time. So the data would be used at a higher level.
And Jessica, I just want to, when it comes to data, we very much, in our job, we rely on data very heavily, right? We can go right now, if you give us an address, we can pretty much find historical calls for service across the spectrum on crimes. One of the unfortunate things about hate crimes specifically is that they, I think that the data, the thing that's informative is the lack of data, right? It tells us that we know that people are being victimized because of their identities, because of what they believe. We just don't know how frequently it's happening because people aren't reporting it as often as they may a theft, or as they may, an aggravated assault or second degree battery or something like that. So, a big part of this process and the reason that we want to get in community and we want to talk to people like yourselves who have influence, who are, parts of other groups and people, so that people understand, like, here's what a hate crime is, here's what it looks like to report it, and also you don't have to be afraid to report it. One of our suspicions is that there are folks who, because of the relationship and historic ties to law enforcement, are going to be a lot less likely to come forward and report. I don't know if walking into your office because you're this law enforcement entity is going to lead to a negative outcome for me. Maybe I've got a questionable immigration status. Maybe I have an uncle and a brother who have been very heavily involved in the system and we're innocent. All of those things have really led to us not having a huge data set that will tell us, that in the Gentilly community, these particular groups are being abused at a high clip. So we're very much, we are partnering, between our agencies here. We're also learning as much as we can about what it really takes to educate communities so they feel more comfortable making those reports, and we can begin to really unpack how frequently hate incidents are occurring and what we can do to really start providing support on the ground for those people who might find themselves as victims or who know people who are victimized.
One more question, Mr. Landon. Talk to the audience about vertical prosecution in that particular model and how that's affecting handling hate crime cases.
So the concept of vertical prosecution is something we do in a lot of our specialized crimes. When it comes to special victims crime, child abuse, sexual assault cases and things like that, homicide, we can find those to a single unit. Let me explain general screening first, because maybe that helps it make more sense. Right now, if we get a referral, those things are going to be screened based upon the law enforcement district that they occur in. If something happens in the 4th District, 4th District screener is going to get that. It does not matter if it is a carjacking, theft, battery, or what the crime is. It's going to go to a screener to take a look, figure out if a crime merits filing formal charges and moving forward with it that way. The thing about homicides, and, domestic violence, and, things like hate crimes that really makes it necessary to have a consistent chain of individuals handling those cases is that these are very highly sensitive cases. the people who are reviewing these have a specialty in most instances in understanding what it looks like, right? Like I explained, there are some cases that come through that may not look like hate crimes, that may not look like a domestic incident, that may not look like, child abuse until child abuse is pretty clear, but it may not look like what it is. So that specialized education, that muscle memory of having screened these sorts of cases over and over again really helps you look critically at it. And you really don't want to miss anything. So you really want that handoff, to be within specialized units of people who are accustomed to looking at these cases. They have the relationships with the law enforcement officers who do the investigation, and they just know the signs to look for. And they know the sensitivity of dealing with people who have been victimized by those crimes. You don't want to find yourself in a situation where you are approaching someone who has been battered, someone who's been raped, someone whose family member has been murdered in the same way that you might a theft or some different kind of crime, because you're dealing with folks who, first of all, every fact, every piece of evidence, every statement you can receive is so important, and you don't want to risk offending, re-traumatizing, doing anything that might damage the integrity of that case. So it's really important to have people with that muscle memory, the specialized skills to be able to handle those, and that's what we're doing with hate crimes, similar to those other specialty areas.
Is there anything you would like to add to that?
Something that I should mention earlier is we have people in our office whose only job it is to provide services to victims of crimes. So that is literally from day one. If we find out that there's been a hate crime here, one of the first things that's going to happen from the FBI response is that we're going to put victim services folks in contact with the victim, their family. We're going to talk to them about the process, about what they can expect in terms of the timeline. They will talk about criminal procedure, talk about what they can expect in the courtroom if it gets inside of the courtroom. They can provide information about victims' compensation fund that may be available to them. So there's literally people whose only job it is to do that and engage with victims that we find from various crimes, not just hate crimes, but most certainly that would be a big focus for us.
They also put the victims and their families in touch with resources if they're needing some sort of counseling or mental health resources in their journey through this process. They're also put into contact with those resources.
Thank you. Ms. Dillard, let's talk about a little bit about community outreach and awareness. How does your organization leverage faith to foster dialogue and promote unity across different cultural and religious groups?
Appreciate that, because I think that's key to what we're talking about here, is the recognition that we're interconnected, the recognition that if we come from a place of faith, if we come from a place of spirituality, and how we are engaging with one another, then again, this issue of hate crimes would hopefully go away. We live in an era that it feels like sacred text, whether it's the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud or other teachings, have been weaponized. And the truth of what all of those sacred texts say is not being amplified. And so the work that we do is to bring people together from a perspective of faith. And we talk about people of faith and conscience. I believe that everyone is in fact a person of faith. That doesn't mean religious. That means you have a belief that there is a better world that you are creating, and that you have a belief that it is coming forth because of the works that you're doing. That's faith. And so when we come together to talk about reimagining the world through a restorative justice lens, when we talk about what does it mean to engage our spiritual practices in a way that makes us know that we are to step up and step out, right? So you can have a belief in the world and the jobs if you're in school here now and you're thinking about what you want to do in the future. You're creating that vision, but what do you want to use that for? And so a piece of what we do is to make sure that people acknowledge that things like hate crimes happen. We have a history in this country, we have a history in this city, that too many people say, well, that's in the past and it doesn't exist. And if we don't acknowledge the history, whether it's 50 years ago, 150 years ago, or yesterday, then we're missing out. Then people are not feeling as a community like there's a need to step up and say, I heard or saw or experienced something that makes me need to call one of your offices, right? And so one of the projects that we have is the Orleans Legacy Project, where we are the umbrella organization for. And the Orleans Legacy Project is working to bring markers from, and I want to get the name right, EJI, National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And those markers are of horrific incidents, being lynchings here in the city. To bring the markers as a way to say it happened here on this soil, so that by acknowledging it, we can heal that past event that continues to carry forward. We were having this conversation before the panel started. To acknowledge the history and the harm that took place as a way to say it cannot go forward. And so a piece of what the Center for Faith Plus Action does is to have retreats, to have listening sessions, to engage in these kind of conversations so that people will own the past as a way to heal in the future. I feel like there was something else I was going to mention, but it's not.
No, you answered it perfectly. Do you mind doing me a favor and expounding a little bit on it, because I appreciate all of your comments. What role, can you talk a little bit more about what role does restorative justice play in addressing hate crimes, and how can it be implemented effectively?
Great question. So the first thing about restorative justice is it centers the victim. There is a way, with all due respect, we know, I used to be a public defender for a long time, not in New Orleans, but there is a way that the criminal court system does not center the victim. The focus is on, is the person that we arrested, in fact, the person who did the crime? And restorative justice centers the victim. It requires acknowledgement that a harm occurred. It requires engagement and relationship building that includes the community. And so through restorative justice as we know it after a harm has occurred, the person who is harmed, the victim, the person who has caused the harm, come together in a very intentionally created space that takes months to get to. They have their own community members in the space. And then there are other community members that can play a role in this. So District Attorney Williams has been great about engaging in restorative justice. We'll lift up Charles Amos and the father, forgetting the father. Charles Amos murdered his best friend in a terrible situation as teenagers. And the father of the person that Charles murdered reached out and said, I want Charles home, he's done enough time. And so the district attorney's office sat down with the victim's father and family members and Charles and other community members to say, if this is going to happen, what's it going to look like? And so there's an accountability piece that says, here's what I did, and the victim gets to ask whatever questions they feel they need to hear. And so sometimes it's a why. The person who's done the harm gets to hear in a healthy environment the impact, which may be greater than what we know on the surface of what a burglary can do, what a murder can do, what a hate crime can do. And remember, hate crime is not just a word, it's an action. So I think about, there are some murals focused on Palestine that a white man has gone and painted over, and he's got some social media. And he says he's doing these things because he hates what's happened. He hates those people that created the murals. And so imagine having a conversation. There was an event a week ago where the Center for Restorative Approaches executive director was there with a young man who had tried to steal a car and the woman who owned the car, and they had been through a restorative circle. And he had sat with this woman and a community in circle to say, here's what I did, here's what was going on. Some of the takeaways that he spoke about as the person who tried to steal the car was that he didn't know that when you're angry with somebody, you could simply have a conversation and work it out. The woman whose car was stolen learned that this young man had always wanted to be on a boat but had never been. And so one of the contract agreements that came out was that he would get involved in a program that's allowing him to learn about boats and be on ships. That's not something the criminal legal system is set up to do. But when we talk about restorative practices where people come together, where we listen to one another, we're guided to ask why and to share my role in what has happened. And the community gets to say, how are we going to surround this and help? There's not an opportunity for community involvement, unfortunately, or it's an alternative, in the court system. And the court system does what it needs to do, but there's not that voice at the end that we get to have to say, here are other ways to engage, to resolve the harms, to heal the harms. And so restorative justice allows the victim to bring what they need, to hear what they need to hear, and for the harmer as well, with a community voice.
Thank you so much. Is there another panelist who want to add to that?
Hello. The issue of healing and faith is a difficult one. And you talk about situation overseas, issues have been going on for over 70 years, and trying to heal, which has been very difficult, because part of the problem is our leaders are the problem in themselves in trying to engage in restorative justice practices. I wouldn't even be living in this country, if I wasn't my families weren't just driven out of the homeland of Palestine. I would not be here sitting right now if we were not driven out. Here we are 75 years later, trying to engage in peaceful attitudes, and yet we're seeing another big bombing last week. Now over 40,000 people have died. People living in their homes who don't want any trouble. They are victimized because we have leaders who feel like violence is the way to address things. I have visited overseas multiple times. I've been around soldiers with machine guns just standing behind me, trying to buy a falafel sandwich, just scared to death. I've had family members taken to concentration camps just for walking down the street at the wrong place at the wrong time, haven't done anything. Family members who have had their faces put into toilets and flushed on. And still to this day, as they've left the concentration camps 30 years later, they can't get over it. We talk about rape and things like domestic violence. People can't get over these kinds of things. They're just traumatized forever because there's no way to heal. It's been difficult. And so you identify these types of things that are going on, these hate crimes that continue on and on and on, and yet there is no resolve. We talk about domestic violence. A former student of mine called me this morning, 6:10 in the morning, and I'm asleep. I answer the phone, and she says, Dr. Ismail, there's so much domestic violence, and she lives in rural areas of Louisiana. These women are hiding in the woods because the system is not helping them. They just keep getting beaten, bruised, and there's nothing being done. They go to court and nothing is being done. Nobody's doing anything. So how do we stop this? When we think about hate crimes, the biggest hate crime is assault. How do we revolt and reserve assault when our leaders don't seem to have the solutions to address this? And this has been going on for decades. Why can't we find these solutions to be able to engage in restorative justice and help our victims, rather than our victims are just scared to death? The situations just get worse and worse, and they seem to have nowhere to go in order to get their assistance. And so we talk about restorative justice, but we need our leaders to push it and encourage it and get these people in position to be able to heal. Because right now they're just running, and they're running, and they're running. Hate crimes has doubled in our secondary school and higher education the last 4 years. And you ask yourself, why is that the case? Why have hate crimes more than doubled in our school systems, K through 12 and higher ed? The question becomes, where are we as a society in terms of morality? What's the message that's being sent? When people are putting people down because of their race, their religion. I'm Palestinian and Muslim, I've dealt my fair share. where people are just uneducated. You know, Islam means peace, but we're not engaging in peace, right? We looked at differently, looked at as terrorists, because that's the message that's being sent. And the focus should be on peace. People just want to live in safe environments, and right now, we are just not. We are living in a world right now where we're scared. The gun violence is running rampant. Domestic violence is at the all-time high. They've asked me to come to court last week just to see all these cases that are going on. It just keeps getting worse, worse, and worse. And so sometimes I feel, maybe a lot of the panelists on here, we feel helpless. What more can we do to address these things? Why does this keep getting worse? And why are people engaged in this type of behavior? From gun violence to domestic violence to hate crimes to rape. Why is this going on at such rampant paces that we can't seem to reduce it? I don't have the answer, but it's something that we kind of continuously work on. And again, as my colleagues mentioned, we need to gather in forums. That's what we do at the Center for Racial Justice. We just gather people together like these forums and discuss it. We go into one school after the other to sit down with our young people to discuss it. One of the things that's lacking in our school systems is we don't talk about any of these things. There's no classes on social emotional learning. We do the reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that's we have to go through those things. There needs to be a class every day to talk about life. I think it's part of the problem. These young people have no resource to go to discuss about what's going on. Last year I had sex trafficking awareness. We had Sex Trafficking Awareness Month, and I had a speaker here who does work in this. And after the event, 6 of my students text her. I don't know which one, she had to be confidential. That said something to me. 6 students left that and had to text her. And that made me realize what is going on. I've had students share with me. They've been raped, incest, cousins raping them, grandparents abusing them. Constant stories, constant. It's like, what is going on that these young people are dealing with these kinds of issues? And I hope with this funding that we have, we'll be able to address some of this, because it is scary and it's sad, because I'm having these conversations on a day-to-day basis. People just call me all day today. How can we address this? What can we do? I'm running. I'm being abused. We go to the Louisiana State Women's Penitentiary, and people are in prison for domestic violence. Tell me your story. Well, my significant other was abusing me. I mean, just and finally murdered him. I just had to defend myself, and he has a life sentence. And I'm like, these women have life sentences for domestic violence and continuously being abused, and the system wasn't doing anything. What do you expect people to do? Would you defend yourself? So something is off, and again, it's something that we need to focus in on. And I get up in the morning and I ask myself, do the best you can and go to bed. If people just did that every day, can you imagine the world how it would be?
So there was a few things. Thank you so much, Dr. Ishmael. There was a few things that I heard in this commentary. I heard a lot about policy recommendations that's definitely needed, legislation that's needed. I also heard intersection. It's something that I started to delve into as I started this work, because when I first started this work, I also thought about hate crimes from a perspective of immunity. I thought about it from lynching and, from the 60s and the 70s and things that had occurred. However, there are a lot of intersections that happens when, as it relates to hate crimes. So with someone, with one of our federal partners like to discuss, like how is human trafficking, how does that intersect domestic violence, how does that intersect with hate crimes?
Maybe getting a little bit out of my lane as far as human trafficking goes. We know that it is present in just about all. I will say that I have no experience investigating that. As far as how it intersects with hate crimes, I know that some of our victims of human trafficking are going to be minorities, whether they have immigration issues. So they're going to be different, maybe a similar victim profile, sadly, but they're going to be looked at very differently.
So in my work as a public defender, I was with the Federal Defender's Office and did sex trafficking cases. And the component that seems like the potential for an intersectionality is part of what you're speaking to, and that is the choice that the person who is trafficking someone on how they are choosing the individuals. And that can come First of all, it's not under the legal view of hate crime per se, but there's that component. The fact that Black, Indigenous, and people of color are more likely to be sex trafficked. And I want to say that what we know about sex trafficking, it's not always some random person like we see going to a bus station looking for a homeless kid, but that is part of it. And so that's the experience I have, is understanding who the people are that are doing the trafficking and how they're identifying who those individuals are. But I believe the penalties for sex trafficking are going to be so much greater that there's not a need to necessarily look at that intersectionality. Any of the crimes, as you said, Professor, that it's about hate, assaults, all of those actions, there's a way to say that they are in fact a hate crime, but not from the legal definition that we're talking about. And I think that's one component to lift up that I think y'all have talked about, is where there's a like something's happened and it doesn't feel right. There's a gut piece that says, is it connected to race? Is it connected to homophobia? Is it connected to gender issues? If you've got that moment that pauses inside of you, take the moment to pause with it and think about what you're hearing here. And make the phone call, whether it's to a professor or a community member. It may not feel like you need to call the FBI, but talk to somebody to identify whether in fact that gut check is something you need to go with.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Ishmael, with that being said, how do you think academic research can help law enforcement and policymakers make better, to help them better understand the root causes of hate crimes and develop effective intervention strategies?
One of the downfalls, I guess, in academics is we publish, we present, I've published 35 books and 85 articles, and how is this useful in impacting social change? And we sort of get this criticism of we present and publish for each other. And so what are we doing with this? And this is where I think when the university, Dillard University decided to start the Center for Racial Justice, this is where I started to see the impact of taking the research that's been done in, when I'm writing reports, et cetera, whether we're working on domestic violence or hate crimes or poverty or gun violence, I've been able to use my work and share it with the various agencies, saying, well, here's the numbers, here's the research, and we look and we sit in these meetings and, well, how can we make change because of this data, right? And so I think that's the biggest part of academics, is a lot of data is collected, but from agencies, from the state, local, and federal level, we always question, well, what is this used for? And we have information, and I think I've been put in a position to be a social change agent, but a lot of academics are not. This is where my role has become very significant the last 4 years. And actually, I've had a transition in career, where I've focused the first 20, 25 years and I was obsessed with publishing, actually, just publishing, you can get your name out there. And now, as my career shifted and I'm focusing on advocacy, I can see where now the research is very beneficial. And that's why the Center for Racial Justice is very important that it be research oriented. We have a Journal of Education and Social Justice, which we do 2 issues a year, so that all the work that's being accomplished in the center is being documented and published, so that we can share it with you guys and the various different agencies, as well as some books that we've done. We've done 4 books out of the center as well. And so that the work that is being done is actually not just hearsay, but we're documenting it, citing the literature, and sharing the data with the various partners that we're working with. And then using that data to, like I said, we've gotten 4 grants out of it. So the data that we've collected, we'll be able to utilize in getting a $1 million grant, a $300,000 grant, and some smaller grants as well. But in order to apply for grants, you got to have what? You got to have data. And the data we've used, we've employed it in our funding, and very thankful that we'll be able to get some private funding and also some federal funding to be able to run this center. So we're appreciative of that.
So what are some areas of hate crime research do you think are in need of further exploration?
Really, I think the 3 areas that are typically, again, in education are, again, vandalism, assault, and intimidation. And sometimes I think, and I'm moving to the 3rd one, I think intimidation is probably the most prevalent form of hate crime. People are they utilize power against each other. And so this is also not only Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but also National Bullying Awareness Month. And people don't recognize the impact of bullying that goes on in our in our school systems. And so, when I'm thinking about in terms of academics, I think intimidation and bullying are probably the two most prevalent areas of research, or areas that we need to concern with more, because that's what the most impactful things that are going on in our schools. Kids just seem to be mean, honestly. And then we did a forum on Know Your Rights a few months back here on campus. We were talking to some of these kids, and it's just, wow, I can't believe how cruel young people are to each other. And then you question, well, where's this coming from? And then you think about the homes and the parents. And a lot of this, to me, I think I'm sort of pessimistic when we look into the future. I think society and morality has really declined. And I don't know if we're ever going to get back to the time where I grew up. We had strong family units and things of that nature. And, when we talk about religion and faith, and I was talking to my class last semester, and I'm very religious. I do my prayers and I fast, and what I do in life every day, like work, family, how I eat, everything is religious based for me. And so I asked the students, I said, well, how many of you are religious? And most of them, they believe in God, but don't really practice anything, don't really believe anything. I mean, nothing connects. And I think that's where the direction where society is going. I'm pessimistic. One of the things that, and I'll say this, the U.S., we're more multicultural than any society in the world, right? We know this. That's a positive, but the more I've thought about it too, there's a negative aspect to that, because there's no similarities with anyone. I don't assume anything about anybody. And you go to a Buddhist country, everybody, or Thailand, everybody's Buddhist. There's a lot of similarities. You go to Islamic countries, there's a lot of similarities in terms of how we view marriage and eating, and we all close on Fridays, we all go pray on Fridays, we fast. You automatically assume things in terms of moralities and beliefs. We lack that in the U.S. because we don't promote anything, right? You look at our leaders, what are they promoting? We look at these debates, what are we gathering? There's no consistency. And again, diversity is great, but we got to learn to appreciate and understand it. We don't seem to do that. And I'm very concerned, as we work on hate crimes and things of this nature, that we're almost kind of an endless fight that's just going nowhere, because I think society in general has just lost all of its morality. And again, we all have different definitions of what we consider right or wrong, but it just seems like we're very individualized. I'm gonna do what I want when I want, and so be it. And so, and I just don't see the direction that that's gonna change anytime soon.
I hear you and I appreciate you. What I want to lift up is the power of the individual that gets lost. If we're looking to our national leaders, if we're even looking to our city council, we've lost our own power in many ways. And so the responsibility, you all have showed up here. How is it you're carrying yourself in each and every moment? What are the words that you're using? What is the engagement that we as individuals have to change that tide? To change that current. We are in a state where a governor was elected in a primary because 32 or 37% of the eligible voters voted. It is almost unheard of for there not to be a runoff between candidates. And he came in and burned everything in his team that were advancements that were resourcing and dealing with some of the concerns we have about people who have been to prison. People who are being taken to prison in the way that they're being engaged. And that was because we as individuals with individual power didn't use it. And so I want to lift up the fact that we have the power to change what our leadership is doing. We have the power to change the atmosphere on this campus and in our homes. And part of the role of having community is that you have people that are also there to support you, to support me, to support the panelists, to walk in a way, to engage in a way that is one that is for healing, not just for me, because if I were doing this work just for me, I wouldn't be on this panel today. But our responsibility as individuals to one another as well. And so are we speaking to that? Are we lifting that up? Are we voting in a way that is about healing and not about greater harm? It's been hard to watch in our lifetimes what's happened. But I do believe not only will the pendulum swing back, but there's a way that we can have the pendulum swing to one that is of communities that are thriving and people that are healed, and break that pendulum off and stay there in that space.
I love where this conversation's gone. I really, what both you guys said resonated with me deeply. And it brings me back to Jessica's question about intersectionality, what leads to someone being human trafficked, victim of a hate crime. You know, what are those vulnerabilities that are preyed upon by perpetrators? And what Dr. Espinel said about sort of that shared sense of morality that we seem not to have. I'll take it a step further. I think we don't have a shared idea of what the truth is, because so many people are able to tailor it to what they believe. And I think that in the public safety system, in our country generally, you know, we're a lot of traumatized people who really, we're in a crisis of trust, right? And you know, as I spoke about engaging community and how important that is for folks, identifying agencies as theirs, and identifying this as something I can use, I will use, that I can feel comfortable referring other people to. I think about religious institutions, I think about government, right? And I think about how some folks, we talk about the younger generations not being as religious as some of us may have been as we were growing up. Those anecdotes about people who've been abused by a parent or grandparent, you know, pastors, by, you know, someone else who was in their church or their school, and how often we're able to see those stories on social media and play out on television. I think it absolutely creates an aversion, right, in people. And when someone's saying a different thing, if I don't agree with government, or if I believe government is shady, or if I think religion is shady, then, you know, if I want to look away, like, there's confirmation bias all over the place that lets me not re-engage with those institutions, not re-engage with those systems, not re-engage with those people. So, you know, this rambling thing, you know, really causes me to focus on Tormi, who is one of our colleagues who's in the office. We spoke a little bit about, and Caroline spoke a little bit about the restorative justice work that D.A. Williams, who's a DA, who is a crime fighter, a prosecutor, who's supposed to be looking to lock bad people up. One of the things that makes that office attractive for me is the fact that we have a civil rights division, that this is someone who knows that we need to prosecute people who do bad things, but we also need to make sure that we're not using jail as our only solution, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. Everybody doesn't have to go and spend 20 years of their life away based upon the thing they did. There are alternatives. Some things are lower-level crimes that could graduate, but if you get an appropriate intervention, like a restorative justice, like some level of diversion, which allows someone to really identify the things that they did as wrong, and not just something that we do because it's what I saw my brother or uncle or aunt or whomever do. Like, you know, some of this behavior that's just abjectly, you know, odd and criminal to us, like when we identify it, seems second nature because it's, you know, it's the family business, or it's, you know, it's what I hear my favorite artists reaffirming over and over again is like what cool people do. And that sounds ridiculous for people who are, I know in college, none of us are susceptible to peer pressure and to, you know, influence by people who may not have our best interest involved, but it's something that's happening to the oldest among us, where you are being fed, you are receiving information, and if you don't have that you know, personal agency, if you don't have something that you are, you know, in search of, there's not a mission that you're on, it's easy for you to hop on the conveyor belt and just go along and do the thing that you're being told to do. So, sorry, all of this to talk about our civil rights union and the fact that you know, understanding that there's been a lot of abuse in the New Orleans community specifically, because I don't know how many of you guys know that, you know, we were simultaneously the incarceration capital of the world, meaning that we sent more people to jail than any other place in the world. Maybe there's some country out there that did it a little worse, but only one. And also the exoneration capital of the world, which means that we got it wrong more often than anybody else. There's a lot of people in Angola, a lot of people in hunts, a lot of people in jail who didn't do the thing that they were accused of, which means you send somebody away for their formative and a lot of years of their life, but also like the person who did that awful thing is out here living with you and I. So the DA decided that a part of restoration, a part of, healing that crisis of trust that exists in our community and communities around this nation, frankly, was to take a look at those cases, to have a conviction integrity unit to look back and see where there are glaring markers that could tell you that, oh, we arrested Keith, who is, 6 foot, dark skinned with a beard. Like, oh, it was a 5'2" white guy who committed this crime, and the jury didn't take a thoughtful look at the evidence in this thing. So, I think, and someone mentioned like the leadership, and leadership kind of giving signals to us to do things in a different way. And I think, while nobody's perfect, I think the bravery to do something like that, knowing that the darts are coming out, knowing that people are going to attack you for doing that thing that's a little unorthodox, it means the world to people, especially a community like ours, where you don't bump into someone who doesn't have a story about how they have a loved one, how they have a friend, how someone they know is in jail, went to jail, didn't do it, how they're raising their brother's kids, so sorry for rambling, but one of the things, it just really, we've got a crisis of trust, and I think everything that we can possibly do through all of our systems, our institutions, our religious organization, to restore that and understand that people are traumatized. So you're not just operating from a base level, that you need to put a little bit more work in to engage people and make them feel heard, understood, and that they're redeemable. If you're not doing that, we're not, actually doing the work.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lane. I have one more question for all the panel members before we close out and take questions from the audience. So for everyone on the panel, how can we ensure that the work we do to address hate crimes today leads to lasting and meaningful change for future generations? And I kind of already think that a lot of you have already answered that, but definitely take a stab at it. How can we ensure that the work we do to address hate crimes today leads to lasting and meaningful change for future generations?
So I think educating ourselves, right? I think, again, the purpose for this, the purpose for all of these that we are going to seek to do is really to kind of educate the public, but also educating ourselves. All of us, I think, can look at ourselves and say, we're in positions of power, where we have some influence over, maybe it's one person, but we've got some influence to begin making sure people understand what this looks like, making sure people understand the pure fact that it exists, it's happening, that we're not in this sort of post-racial, post-discrimination world. And that doesn't mean that you dwell on it and that you're looking at everybody who looks different from you or who prays different from you to say, is it you? But that when it happens, we're calling it out, that we are using the resources available to us to make sure that people can get the help and relief that they need. And that we're really changing the narrative. And like some of that can be in your own family, own friend group, your frat, whatever it is. Like I am a proud member of Alpha Phi Fraternity Incorporated, Spring 06 initiative. And, when I think about fraternity culture, I think about being a young man, and I think about where I am in my life right now. The little roasting that you do, when you're talking to your friends, when you, just Joseph, on one another, and you talking about the person who comes by on the yard whenever you're in college. A lot of that stuff is just in good fun, right? That you don't mean any harm. You're not trying to really hurt anybody. But there's a culture, and there is a, you are giving a stamp of approval for anybody over whom you've got influence. That what I'm doing is okay. It's cool so long as it's just in good fun. It's okay so long as I didn't hurt anybody. I ain't hit him, right? But you may have used a racial epithet or something that disparages somebody because of their sexual orientation or because of their sexual identity, right? I think about lost opportunities, and I also think about what I'm able to do with the platform right now, and the way I'm able to kind of explain those things to people who I have an opportunity to speak to. And I think it's without everybody having to go out and be Dr. King tomorrow and go and start preaching on the yard and get on the soapbox. I think there's small changes that we make in our lives. I think everybody here, more than you knew whenever you stepped in the door about what hate crimes are, and who folks are in the community who are taking their best stab at healing and making sure people have a voice and are advocated for. So I think tapping into the resources, educating where you can, changing your own behavior where you can, and just becoming a part of this partnership where we're trying to move in a better direction.
In the construct of what we're talking about today, one is to say this educational system is going to have people engaging more. But I think the way that we see a better tomorrow is to also say, what are the alternatives? If the current court system and the current carceral state and the current structure of law enforcement was bringing an end to crime, then we would see a reduction. That when I was born, when Dr. Ishmael was born, when we were all born, crime would be gone. And that's not the case. And so to say they are investing and they are resourcing because something new has to be done. But to also say that you all are here and you're creative and you're thoughtful, what are the alternatives to what we've been doing to end hate crimes? What are the alternatives that maybe we haven't thought of, that you all will tomorrow over breakfast with a loved one be like, oh, what if we did this? And speak it into being. And what you've talked about, and I think we've all touched on, words are powerful. Thoughts create. And so to have a vision where it stops sounds a little Pollyannish, and yet it's necessary. What is the horizon that we are building toward? And if it's a horizon where there are fewer hate crimes, that's one. But if it's a horizon where there are no hate crimes, that's another. And so what are your thoughts? And what are the words you're using to create the community that you know that we all are entitled to? That's how we're going to get there too.
I agree with both of my colleagues. I was on a forum last week downtown, and we were talking about a lot of these crimes that are going on, and one of my colleagues suggested, well, we need some new policies. And I said, no, we don't need new policies. All the laws are in place, but we just need to implement them. How do we create a fair and equitable system where everybody gets treated fairly? How do we have our leaders employ the system that's there to protect us? And that's what's not working, consistently not working. And as my colleague said yesterday to me, he says, well, the system doesn't work. It just seems like it's just built for lawyers to make a whole lot of money. And I said, well, a lot of people can't really disagree with that. You have cases, I know a lot of cases that have gone in court for 7, 8, 9 years, a 5-year-old could figure out. Literally, I'm not being sarcastic, a 5-year-old could figure out this case. Why do these cases keep going on and on in the system for decades? Somebody's making money, right? Somebody's making money. And so as we talk about voting is important. We have 1 million African-American voters in this state. You know how many of them voted in the last couple of elections? Small percentage. Why did the governor not choose to come to my forum last year? We had invited 6 candidates. 5 came. Who didn't come? Landry didn't come. Why didn't he come? Because New Orleans, he didn't care for New Orleans. He knows who's going to go out and vote. He sent his message. I just don't care. We can all get up, and again, we can get engaged in active listening. Active listening is important. Your question was a hard one and an easy one. I mean, you really gotta just do what we can. Each of us in this room do what we can every day to make it a better life for the people around us. We can't be individualized. We can't be selfish. We need to go out and do what we can to send the message out there. We know the difference between right and wrong. All of us in here knows what's right and wrong. But for whatever reason, as a society, we don't seem to know that. And I guess my disappointment is the criminal justice system doesn't seem to work in the way it needs to. And we've had 2 people executed last week or 2 that evidence was clear that they were probably innocent, and yet nobody stood up. The governor just didn't stand up and say, well, we gotta stop this. And the question is why? How do we get our leaders to stand up and do the right thing? Whether you're a police officer, whether you're a judge, whether you're a lawyer, all of these, do the right thing, make the right decisions, and again, it's just frustrating. But all we can do is control what we can control. Each of us get up every day, do the best we can, and make a difference. And that's what I try to do every day. In the power that I'm having and what God has given me, do the best I can, make a difference, and hopefully impact lives in a way. I'm very fortunate. Had a great family, great mom and dad, et cetera. And I recognize when I'm working at Dillard and other places, people didn't have it maybe as good as I did. And I'm just trying to make a difference. My mentor passed away back in April, and I spoke at her funeral for a long time. And, I met her, and I was at a crossroads in my life. I was depressed. People kind of can bring you down, and I lack faith in my capabilities, and she really brought me up. And I remember having dinner with her a few months before she died, and she brought me to the kitchen, and we were just the 2 of us. And I felt like it was the Last Supper, but she just said to me, she says, make sure you help others, just like I helped you, right? She just gave me those words. It's like, impact on people's lives, or impact lives in general, because that's what she did. And and she almost knew that this was the last time we were gonna have dinner together, because I knew she was not doing well. She had an impact. I'll never forget it, and she just stays in my heart, and it will till the day I die. That we just got to make a difference, do what we can, in the power that we have, and just move forward.
I think real quickly, from the Bureau's perspective, what we can do is continue to educate the public about what a hate crime is, what's the difference between a hate crime and a hate incident, right? We want to know all of it. Educating of local law enforcement agencies, right? Because they're the folks out on the street. They may respond to an incident, and they may not see it for what it actually is, right? And it might be a hate crime, right? So we want to give them some tips so that when they can go out, they do the most thorough investigation that they can do, right? It's that we continue to push the program forward for FBI New Orleans. We're one of only 3 offices in the FBI that has a standalone civil rights squad. It's a commitment from our office and from the Bureau that this is a big deal here, right? We put our best agents that we can to work these violations. Hale obviously is one of them. It's that we become really good partners to folks, right? There's no army of one when it comes to combating hate crimes, right? It's not like, hey, we're the FBI and we're here to take over. No, that is not how it goes, right? We are here to be the best partners for you guys. Want us to come talk to a class, anything. We want to get out and we are the community. Like I live in New Orleans. Hale lives in New Orleans. Like we live here, right? This is, we all go to the same grocery stores, right? We want to be good citizens, but we want to gain your trust, right? And if that's sitting down having a one-on-one conversation, we're all game, right? We want to help build trust where maybe it has been lacking, rightly so. But that's what we commit to do. So I imagine you have something else. No? Okay. Kale's quiet.
Yeah. So everybody knows she's my boss. So when I say anything,
I just signed my sheets, that's all I do.
Perfect.
Okay, so now we're gonna open up the floor for answering, for question and answers. If anybody has any questions that they would like to ask, any comments, insights.
I do, but I'll probably need a microphone. Sorry.
Any questions about UFOs? No, okay. I tried to get that in for you.
Testing. Okay. This is all from like your respective backgrounds. How do you balance protecting free speech while also preventing speech that incites or leads to hate crimes?
Can you repeat that?
Sorry, how do you balance protecting free speech while also preventing speech that incites or leads to hate crimes?
So we're not going to prevent speech, right? Because one of the principles of the FBI is we're here to uphold the Constitution. That includes speech that we don't agree with or speech that we find abhorrent. We do have to differentiate because somebody might say I'm going to hide behind free speech, but as the statutes prove, true threat is not protected by free speech, right? So that's what we're representing. We're not there to use the legal test to find out what's the words that being said and if that qualifies. But as the FBI, we are prohibited from opening any case that would touch on based on a free speech comment that somebody said. What we're doing is trying to uphold the Constitution. We don't have to agree with it, but we're going to use the Constitution as a guide.
There's a lot of ugly speech out there, right? A ton, right? Social media, everywhere. But that's not gonna be something that we do.
You can't use that information per se to open an investigation.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough job, particularly for Michael and Amwin and for people who we ask to really screen cases because, we don't make arrests. We're not an investigative agency, in the traditional sense, like our partners at FBI or LSP or PD, right? So the referrals we receive are written up based upon the interpretation of the officer who responds. So they write up what they have based upon the elements that they are aware of. And the reason that our screening department has been so expanded, and we've added so many more people here, because it's not as simple. It's just not as simple, right? There's a lot of people who spend a lot of money and time in law school, right, to be able to identify these elements. But every crime is nuanced, right? Nothing is, exactly black and white. So in the same way that we need to look at otherwise sort of innocuous incidents for whether or not a hate crime occurred, they have to do a bunch of legal research and apply analysis to these specific cases to figure out, like, where's that line? Like, was this speech evidence of this individual's intent to commit the crime that we see written up in this report? But it's a difficult one, right? We're certainly not existing to criminalize free speech, but you really just have to look at all of the factors. So to answer your question with a word salad, it kind of depends. It's not our intent to criminalize free speech, but you do have to look at the totality of what's written in a report and draw your best analysis after a reasonable research and review.
And to your point, as far as speech, or we've prosecuted or we've investigated cases where the crime actually happened in cyberspace, right? It happened on a Zoom meeting where an individual got into a Zoom conference call and was dropping racial epithets and followed with a threat. The person wasn't, there in the presence. In this instance, the victims were a classroom of 10-year-olds, and it was a person, again, making threats on a Zoom call. So right there, we use the legal test. We're like, well, that's not free speech. You can't threaten to, murder somebody in that fashion. And luckily, we were able to identify the person through the records, through the Zoom logs, and trace it to a person out of state who was ultimately prosecuted and found pled guilty and was sentenced for it.
Like, you can't use your cell phone to threaten somebody, right? I mean, you can, but there could be there may be a federal charge for that, right? So if you send somebody an online threat, right, and use your phone to do that
And one last point that I'm going to shout out Caroline because she's got the answers to the test. She reminded me, to talk about the role of juries because, as I spoke about this thoughtful screening and review process we go through, but Caroline's absolutely right. Much of it is up to you and up to the public who sit on juries. We're going to present the case based upon what we reasonably believe to be the truth and what we think we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt. But ultimately, it's going to be up to the analysis of jurors who are going to take the law as given to them and they're going to apply it to this situation. So that's why, this whole education process is very much important for, the average citizen, because everybody might not see themselves as a victim or defendant or lawyer or judge in court, but all of us are eligible to be called as jurors. So, it behooves us all to kind of, even before that process, familiarize ourselves with, what it looks like to be in court. And that's a real part of civic engagement, like voting, that gives you as much a voice as anything in our society. And Caroline, I want to pass it to you because you might have something. Okay, all right. Thank you so much for that recommendation, but she's absolutely right about that.
Thank you all so much for that particular dialogue because it was something that was highlighted at the hate crimes conference that sometimes hate incidents and hate speech can lead to the hate crime. So it's kind of like a spiraling effect that can definitely happen. Are there any more questions from any audience members, any comments?
They may not hear you in the back. More of a comment, can you hear me? There you go. It's more of a comment, and I think I know I agree with Professor Johnson, or because I am a pessimistic in this case, because in situations like this, I'm very much the glass is not empty, and I think that's what drives my career goals. But although this was for extra credit, okay, I was here to observe and learn, and I really did learn a lot. So that's why I said I don't have any questions because everything that you said was very clear and concise, and it educated me in something like you said. I walked in here and I thought I'm not saying I know anything, but it was definitely not what was going on. And when Professor talked about not necessarily community leaders, government officials, and controlling what how they take policies and make them happen. That's the word that I'm looking for. That's what I'm talking about. You can't control that. You can't control whether or not the people you vote for actually do what they say they're going to do. And so, yes, people need to get out and vote so we have the right people in office that do what we want them to do. But at the end of the day, it's like, you can't change it. And you can't change the fact that hate crime is going to increase. All we can do is hope. Because you can't eliminate them altogether. Because people, they're not going to wake up one day and be like, oh, it's going to be a great human being today. That's just not anymore. It sucks. But it doesn't. I just really enjoy it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for that too. And I'll say, I had the privilege with city council for about 7 years before going to the DA's office. And you're right, you can't be someone's conscience. You can't make them do the right thing every time a vote comes up. I will say that there are some groups who are very effective. There's some people who are very effective at making their case in a way that absolutely compels and changes hearts and minds. And maybe that's on one vote. Maybe that's one out of the 7 votes they make on a given day. But I've seen people come in and apply pressure in a way where they educate, they guilt. Sometimes you got to be berated a little bit to be reminded of what your grandmama told you was the right thing to do. But there's so many tools today that are used for civic engagement that really breed better outcomes. There was a group on a particularly controversial vote who, I don't know how they did it, but they paid some sort of phone some bot calling agency, and the phones literally like ring off the hook, and you can hear it cascading. Every time you hang the phone up, it's ringing again. Somebody saying, "Hey, can I have a vote? Yes, on this issue," right? So there's a lot of different organizing that can be done, because, really the voting piece of it, right? You log your vote, hopefully your candidate wins. But even when your candidate doesn't win, most of us have a tendency to disengage, right? It's like, oh man, Keith's back in office. He's not gonna do the right thing. I don't even wanna go talk to him. The problem is that now that person's gonna be able to continue to do what they want, because only their supporters are coming up and they're saying, "You're doing a great job. You're doing exactly what we elected you to do." You have to continue to engage. And, oftentimes when you look at local city council meetings and you look at state government legislative hearings, they're not packed out. And most people don't even know what the most important things are. I think about the budget committee at the city council level. Sometimes you might see a public works meeting because everybody's mad about the water bill. Everybody's at that committee. But then when all the money, millions of dollars are being moved around, it's one person in there, and they sound like the crazy person because they're in there like, no, don't spend that money on that. And the leaders are able to say, oh, it's just one of you guys. We're gonna move forward, business as usual, right? So I just challenge people to, apply pressure, make sure that government is holding hearings on important things at times when it's conducive for people to appear. Maybe 10 o'clock on a Thursday, when the average person with a job has to work, isn't the best time for a city council meeting. Maybe hearing all of these items on a day where it's a 9-hour day where people are gonna get tired and have to go. If you have childcare issues in school and you got a history exam that day, like isn't the best. So your voices are most effective. At where you are right now, coming into your own as adults, as our next leaders who are going to challenge these people in 4 years. This is as effective, as many of you can be, and you've got a built-in block of people who believe similarly to what you believe. So bring Dillard out, to these government hearings and let them know how you feel, and that you're not going to take no for an answer.
Anyone else have anything you want to share?
What are the most common hate crimes do you see in your line of work?
Really we've seen some, like we talked about, verbal threats that are true threats. We've prosecuted that. We've seen brief assaults that take a matter of seconds, but at the end of it, you have some serious victimization. I'm not sure what you're looking for in an answer as far as, is there a...
You see, I guess the day-to-day is racially motivated.
Yeah, and if you look at it statistically, it's going to be racially motivated and religious-based. If you look statistically, there's not I'm not going to say there's a high volume of per se hate cases in this region, kind of like what you were talking about. We're wondering if that's an underreporting issue, but without a doubt, locally and nationally, it's going to be, race and religion-based or religious-based biases that are going to motivate those sorts of crimes.
Again, it's one of those things where we don't have a ton of data on the types. I think I would actually not be honest if I try to tell you, hey, here's what those 4 looked like before this year. Obviously, post October 7th, you had things that were referred that had to be reviewed under that lens based upon where and how they happened and the identities of persons involved. But I know that we've got reports based upon what I see on social media and on the news sometimes based upon sexual orientation, sexual identity. There's a ton of hate speech out there as to whether or not anyone takes it seriously, whether or not leadership or people charged to investigate share some of those biases, and that informs how seriously we look at it. It is something that I think we're all trying to figure out, making sure you've got the right people taking a look at these things. I remember a few years ago, like seeing a number of different reports of persons who were trans, who were killed or seriously maimed, and maybe arrests weren't made in all of those cases, and people who were in sex work coming up seriously maimed. So my suspicion, and it's purely on anecdotes and things that I see, are that we've got this happening at a high clip, and you've got people who are being abused. As to whether they make their way through the machinations of government, the public safety system is a whole other matter.
One thing that we're trying to help, we go out and educate some smaller law enforcement agencies, for example, is that if there is a transgender person who is murdered, right, and they are misgendered in the police report, or they're dead named, that's not helpful, right? That's not addressing the issue that would be there, right? That's not just somebody got killed. It's was this person killed because they're trans, right? And so there's a strong push from our part to try to educate so that when crime stats are written down, they're accurate, right? If people are going to get grants off of crime stats and things like that, they have to be accurate, right? So that's something that we've seen that with it that here the last few years here.
Well, thank you all again for joining us this evening for this very important conversation on hate crimes and racial violence. We've definitely heard insightful perspectives, shared valuable experiences, and discussed strategies to address these issues that deeply affect our communities. I hope that this evening's discussion has fostered a greater understanding, as I think it has, and I'm so happy and thankful that the young lady said that. A greater understanding of the challenges we face and the opportunities we have to create real change. Just know that our work is not going to end here. All of my colleagues on this stage, along with many others, we are going to continue to meet. We're going to continue to discuss and find ways to work together in ways in which to collaborate on this very important issue. I encourage all of you to take the insights shared this evening and bring them back to your communities, bring them back to your friends, and talk to them about the things that you learned. Together we can continue to raise awareness, support victims, and stand against hate in all its forms. Thank you again to our panelists. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you to our partners, and thank you all for your engagement and dedication to this cause. And before I end, I also want to thank Dr. Tormey. She leads the work in the District Attorney's Office on the MNTO Cold Case Investigation Unit. And I want you guys to know that there will be a bigger symposium of breakouts, workshops, and I'm definitely going to have Dr. Tormey and her team come there to talk about that very important work. And you guys are going to just love it. So let's move forward with the shared goal of building a safer, more inclusive, and compassionate society.